Leftwich, let me get you to raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Sir, would you state your full name?
My full name is John Robert Leftwich.
Mr. Leftwich, who are you currently employed by?
I am currently employed by Coastal Mart, Inc.
And what are your duties?
My current responsibilities are administrative in nature. They encompass environmental, construction, maintenance, store maintenance, and store permits and licenses.
What's your official job title?
My title is Vice President of Administration.
Okay. Now, would you agree with me that Coastal Mart, Inc. owns convenience stores that, among other things, sell gasoline to consumers looking to fill their vehicles up?
Yes, I agree.
Now, where do you actually work? Where do you actually work? What town?
I work here in Houston, Texas.
Okay. And would that be at Houston, Texas, in the Coastal Towers?
That would be correct, in the Coastal Tower.
Okay. And what company owns Coastal Mart, Inc.?
Coastal Mart, Inc. is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Coastal Corporation.
Okay. And is the main business of Coastal Corporation selling, making of gasoline?
I would characterize Coastal Corporation as being an oil company.
Okay. And part of that business of that oil company that owns Coastal Mart, Inc. is to sell gasoline.
That is correct.
And a lot of the gasoline that Coastal Corporation sells are to your employer or its wholly owned subsidiary, Coastal Mart, Inc.
Coastal does sell gasoline to its subsidiary, Coastal Mart, Inc.
Approximately how many convenience stores does Coastal Mart, Inc. own or lease?
We own approximately 400.
Okay. Are they all
own and or lease approximately 400?
Are they all in Texas?
No, they are not.
Do they all go under the same name?
They do all go under the same name. We have a few stores in Texas who also have the name Maverick Markets, but they also go under the name Coastal Mart, Inc.
Mr. Leftwich, have you been made aware that your company, Coastal Mart, Inc., has been sued in this case because a number of property owners and homes and businesses in and around a Coastal Mart store at 421 South 23rd Street in McAllen leaked gasoline and contaminated those properties, the soil, and the groundwater around them? You aware that's what the suit is about?
Would you state that question again?
Okay. Have you been made aware that your company, Coastal Mart, Inc., has been sued in this case because a number of property owners of homes and businesses in and around a Coastal Mart store at 421 South 23rd Street in McAllen are claiming that that site leaked gasoline and contaminated the properties and soil and groundwater around them?
I'm aware that we are a defendant among others in such a suit, yes.
Okay. Now, how many years have you been an employee of Coastal Mart, Inc.?
I have been an employee of Coastal Mart, Inc. since 1987.
And the particular Coastal Mart site that we're talking about in this lawsuit, we've tried to photograph to make certain so that you could identify the location is right behind you, and I'll ask our camera person if he can pan up to that photograph, which has an exhibit sticker. We'll call that exhibit number 1. Have you ever been to the site in question in this case?
Yes, I have been to the site.
Okay. Looking at what we'll put down is going to be marked plaintiff's exhibit number 1, does that appear to be the Coastal Mart site in question in this case?
Yes, it does appear to be the Coastal Mart site in question.
How many times have you actually been to that site?
I really don't know.
Well, approximately.
I've been to the site several times, but I don't know how many times.
Now, during that time that you've been employed by Coastal Mark Inc., you've come to learn that gasoline that Coastal Mart Inc. sells contains dangerous properties to humans, such as benzene, correct?
State the question again. I didn't hear the first part of it.
During the time that you've come to learn that gasoline, during the time that you've been employed, by Coastal Mart Inc., you've come to learn that the gasoline that Coastal sells contains dangerous properties to humans, such as benzene, correct?
I guess I've never learned that that is only attributable to the gasoline that Coastal sells. I believe that's something that's attributable to all motor gasoline.
That's a fair statement. You've come to learn that.
That's not based on any particular knowledge of my own, but that's something that I certainly understand from others who are experts.
It's known in the industry.
Correct.
You've also come to learn, have you not? Tell me if you have, that benzene is on the list of the Occupational Safety and Hazard Association as a known human carcinogen, that is a cancer-causing agent.
That's probably correct. I couldn't confirm that absolutely.
Let me hand you what we'll mark Plaintiff's Exhibit 2. I think it's let me use that as well. I'm handing you Exhibit number 2, which is entitled Coastal Remediation Company Site-Specific Safety Plan. And it's for the Coastal Mart store, actually 307, number 307, which happens to be this location of this particular Coastal Mart in this case, correct?
I believe that, yes, that's correct.
Okay, this is a January 93 document of Coastal Marts, is it not?
No, this is a, this appears to be a document of Coastal Remediation Company.
Coastal Remediation Company was a wholly owned subsidiary of Coastal, correct?
Objection to form. You go ahead and answer the question, if you understand.
Coastal Remediation Company is one of the coastal companies. I'm not sure which coastal company it is a subsidiary of.
Okay. And you've worked with that part of the company in the specific issues involving this site in McAllen, Texas, right?
Coastal.
Objection is to form.
Go ahead.
Okay, would you state the question
Yeah,
again,
you
please?
have worked with alongside of Coastal Remediation Company regarding the contamination at this particular location in McAllen, correct?
I would not characterize as myself as having worked alongside them.
How would you characterize it?
Coastal Remediation Company was an environmental consultant that was utilized in connection with that property.
And you communicated with them during the period of time they were on the site?
I don't recall having communicated with them directly, no.
Indirectly?
Maybe through reading reports,
Okay.
but not communicating with them directly, no.
And this appears to be one of their safety plans for this particular site, correct? At least that's what the front page indicates.
Yes, it's my understanding would be a safety plan would be something that any environmental consultant would have in connection with any site that it works on.
Looking at Exhibit 2, entitled Coastal Remediation Company Site-Specific Safety Plan, for the Coastal Mart site in question, dated January of 1993. The first page, if you would turn to it, it's actually number 2, page 2, says chemicals of concern, does it not?
Yes.
It says petroleum fuels contain benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, possibly including lead. See Appendix C and MSD for dangerous properties. Is that a fair reading?
That's an accurate reading, yes.
Okay. And if you turn to the Appendix A, Appendix C, it tells about the chemical properties of fuel, does it not? While you're looking at it, tell me if this is a fair reading.
Well, wait a minute, let him look at it.
Well,
He can't answer
you
a
can read
question.
along with me. Gasoline constituents can be divided into 5 major categories: alkalines, alkylenes, cycloalkylenes, aromatics, and additives. The aromatics are the constituents generally regarded as the greatest toxic concern. Fair reading so far?
Yes.
The major aromatics in gasoline are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. Of these, benzene is considered to be the most toxic. Fair reading so far?
Yes.
One characteristic effect of gasoline and its aromatic constituents is their ability to irritate skin when repeated and prolonged exposure occurs. Reproductive effects from gasoline include low birth weight babies, bone marrow suppression, serious CNS effects. Women who are pregnant must avoid exposure, even that of a consumer. Is that a fair reading?
I'm going to object to the form, and Richard, I'd like to have an agreement to have a continuing objection on this line of questioning, as there's nobody that I'm aware of that has made an allegation that they've been injured in this lawsuit.
You can go ahead.
Do we have an agreement, or do you want
Well,
me to
you want to have a continuing objection? That's fine.
to this line of questioning?
Yes.
Certainly. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. The following paragraph reads, under chemical properties in fuel, that benzene, the most toxic constituent, can enter the body through inhalation, ingestion, and skin contact. Studies have noted that chronic exposure to benzene vapor can produce neurotoxic and hematopoietic, or I'm probably not pronouncing that right, I'm sure, blood system effects. Fair reading?
Yes.
Other effects can include headache, dizziness, nausea, convulsion, coma, and possible death if exposure is not reversed. Fair reading?
Yes.
One significant effect of chronic benzene exposure is bone marrow toxicity. There is also an association between chronic exposures to benzene and development of certain types of leukemia. Fair reading?
Yes.
OSHA limits benzene as, excuse me, let me repeat that. OSHA, that's the Occupational Safety and Hazard Association, correct? You've heard
OSHA,
of
I believe, is Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
Administration, okay. Lists benzene as a human carcinogen, and exposure limit as a single chemical is 1 part per million over 8 hours. Fair reading?
Yes.
Now, have you ever had the opportunity to know the information that's contained basically in here before today?
I'm an administrator. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist. I'm not competent to make those kinds of judgments. No.
Well, I don't know whether you're competent to make those kind of judgments, and we're not certainly. You haven't been presented as a doctor here today, but you've come to hear of those types of effects that the constituents or aromatics of gasoline can have on human beings. Correct?
I'm not disputing anything that was written there that you've read.
Now, Coastal has known since 1990 1991, in that time frame, that gasoline at the coastal convenience store that you pointed to in that photograph that's part of this case at 421 South 23rd Street in McAllen, Hidalgo County, Texas, has been found to exist in the soil and the groundwater below that site, correct?
Okay, just so that I am clear on what your question is again, read it back to me again.
Let the court reporter do that.
Okay.
Question. Now, Coastal has known since 1990, 1991, in that time frame, that gasoline at the Coastal convenience store that you pointed to in that photograph that's part of this case at 421 South 23rd Street in McAllen, Hidalgo County, Texas, has been found to exist in the soil and the groundwater below that site, correct?
I believe that is correct.
Now, gasoline, besides being poisonous, as we've been discussing, is also known by you and your company, Coastal Mart, Inc., to be explosive, flammable, and combustible, correct?
Same objection. Can we also have I assume you're going to continue that line of questioning. If so, I'd like to have an agreement for a continuing objection as to form on that one.
Okay.
Okay,
Correct.
is that all right?
I guess. I'm not sure I'm going to continue that line of questioning.
Well,
If I do, it's
if you
okay.
I just don't want to have to interrupt you after every question.
I'm sorry, would you give me that question again?
Would you?
Question. Now, gasoline, besides being poisonous, as we've been discussing, is also known by you and your company, Coastal Mart, Inc., to be explosive, flammable, and combustible, correct?
I would not dispute that.
Doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that, right?
I would not dispute that.
As a matter of fact, Coastal Mart Inc.'s recommend, do they not, that before filling up your car at one of their convenience stores, that you turn off the engine so as to prevent the possibility of igniting an explosive reaction, correct?
That is correct.
Now, although Coastal Mart Inc., the defendant in this case, has known of the contamination of the soil and groundwater at its 23rd Street location since 1990-91, it has, to your knowledge, or has it to your knowledge, ever notified any of the surrounding property owners of that contamination?
Objections to form.
I don't have knowledge that they have.
Well, who would at your company?
I don't know the answer to that.
You know that you never notified anybody in the surrounding area of the site in McAllen, correct?
I have not notified anyone in the surrounding area, no.
And that's although Coastal Mart Inc. has been instructed by the state of Texas to do so on a number of occasions.
I'm not aware that that instruction has occurred on a number of occasions, no.
Well, let me ask you this. How much control do you have over the ability to review and stay in touch with sites that are contaminated that Coastal Mart Inc. owns? I mean, are you somebody that has the ability to go look at the files regarding those sites?
Yes, I do have the ability to do that.
Okay. And do you do that from time to time?
Yes, I do that from time to time.
And do you also have any contact yourself with any of the state of Texas agencies that oversee the cleanup of those kind of sites?
From time to time, but very infrequently.
Do they ever make direct contact with you by letter or correspondence regarding those kind of sites?
There has been such contacts, yes.
So it's not unusual for you to get direct correspondence from the state of Texas regarding coastal sites that are contaminated and the cleanup the state is overseeing on those sites.
It's not unusual to receive correspondence from the state of Texas.
Okay, and in some of those correspondence, particularly in regard with this particular site, are you saying that you never read any directive or request by the state of Texas that Coastal Mart Inc. notify the surrounding owners, property owners around this site of Coastal's, that there's contamination at their site? Is that your testimony?
I'm saying I don't recall the specific correspondence.
So there may have been, you just don't recall.
I don't dispute whether there is or isn't such correspondence.
But you do know that even if there is, that has been directed to you, or you know that you have never had anything to do with contacting anyone out there on 23rd Street to tell them what the state requested.
I have not had any contact with anyone, no.
Now, is it also true that the state of Texas has ordered Coastal Mart Inc. to clean all of the gasoline in the soils, in the subsurface, and the groundwater below its site on 23rd Street very recently as I want to say May of 1999?
I believe that was correspondence from the TNRCC to a number of parties, one of whom is Coastal Mart.
And so the answer to my question is that yes, Coastal Mart has been ordered by the state of Texas, the agency in charge of these types of contaminations, to clean up the contamination of gasoline that exists in the surface and the groundwater at its site in McAllen, Texas on 23rd Street, right?
That is correct, along with a number of other defendants, and it's not just directed at any contamination on coastal site, it's directed on a larger body of contamination.
It's directed at what the state of Texas considers to sites that have migrated the gasoline off of your site and onto other people's properties, correct?
I'm not aware that there's ever been any establishing of fact that any gasoline has migrated off of our site onto other sites.
I understand that's Coastal's position, but the state of Texas doesn't agree with you on that. You understand that?
The state of Texas can speak for itself.
Well, the agency that's in charge of these kind of problems where there's contamination emanating from sites like Coastal's and McAllen, they disagree with you. They say the gasoline that leaked from your place and into the groundwater onto properties other than yours. That's their position, right?
If you've read something that states that that's their position, that may be the case. I'm not aware that they have stated that as their position.
What do you know their position to be?
Just what we've been directed in the letter, and that is that we need to that all parties need to work together to address the contamination that's in this area of McAllen.
Okay, just so we're not trying to guess what was told to Coastal. Let me hand you what's been marked Exhibit 3, and I'll represent to you that it's a letter dated May 17th, 1999 from the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission, directed to, among others, the Mr. Bob Kelly for the legal department of Coastal Mart at the Coastal Towers here in Houston, Texas, regarding the groundwater contamination in McAllen, Texas. I'll hand you a copy of that and ask you if you've ever seen that.
Yes, I've seen this letter.
First of all, the letter does show that it is addressed to Coastal Mart, for the Coastal Mart at 21 South 23rd Street. That is the location that was identified in Exhibit 1 in this particular case, correct?
Yes, the Coastal Mart at 421 South 23rd Street.
Yes, sir, in McAllen.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it
And-
just
and-
states the street address.
And the purpose of the letter is referencing groundwater contamination in McAllen, Texas, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, now you did mention other companies, and in all fairness, we'll look at this, and it is not only directed to Coastal, it is also directed to Brownie's Oil Company for a location at 2301 West Highway 83 in McAllen, Texas, correct?
Yes.
It's also directed this letter to Gilmore Gross Oil Company with a location at 2401 West Highway 83 in McAllen, Texas, correct?
Yes.
Then it has your company's name, and then after that it has Phillips Properties at 2215 West Highway 83 in McAllen, Texas. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And this letter was sent also to the Texas Department of Transportation for locations at 2318 and 2412 West Highway 83 in McAllen, Texas, correct?
Yes.
And the Union Pacific Railroad at West Highway 83 and 23rd Street, correct?
Yes.
Now, it reads, does it not, in the first paragraph, that the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Committee has conducted a review of agency files related to an area of contaminated groundwater within the city of McAllen. Our review has identified groundwater contamination with an area roughly bounded by Beach Avenue to the north, Fresno Street to the south, and 24th Street to the west, and 22nd Street to the east. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
What I'd like to do is, I have Mr. McLean here with me today, is ask him if he can walk around. We've brought a map which will mark Exhibit 4. And we'll wait till he can get around. And you might stand up next to him with it, and take the letter with you. Exhibit 4, Mr. Leftwich, I'll represent to you, is a document produced as an exhibit with one of the expert reports in this particular case, trying to show or depict what is believed to be the actual plume of contaminated soils and or groundwater. The red indicates free product, that is, product that's floating on top of the groundwater. And this is the vicinity in which the contamination has been defined by experts in this case. What I'd like to do is, with Mr. McLean helping the camera person and you, would you look at that map, please? And the state of Texas, again, let's read together, defined the area of contamination is roughly bounded by Beach Avenue to the north, if we can show that. Just go through there one more time. Fresno Street to the south. 24th Street to the west. And 22nd Street to the east. Now, first of all, did I read the state agency's determination as to where the contamination is fairly in their letter dated May 17, 1999?
State the question again, please.
First of all, did I read the letter from the state of Texas to Coastal and others dated May 17, 1999, fairly, which indicated what they believed to be the plume?
Well, I wasn't looking at the letter while you were reading it. I was looking at the map while Mr. McLean was pointing out the boundaries. So in order to say whether you read it fairly or not, I'd have to be looking at it while you read it. if you want to read that
Well, we'll do it
sentence again.
All right. On review, on our review has identified groundwater contamination with an area roughly bounded by Beach Avenue to the north, Fresno Street to the south, 24th Street to the west, and 22nd Street to the east. Fair reading?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Y'all can sit down.
Can you, just for the record, identify the map on the lower right-hand corner?
The plate 2 to the ETI report, which shows benzene concentrations.
Okay. You comfortable?
As soon as my counsel lets me get back up to the table, I'll be counsel. I'll be comfortable.
It goes on to read, does it not, sir? The area of contamination is the result of releases from multiple properties that may have commingled to form a single area of groundwater contamination. Current owners, operators, or companies referred to the TNRCC corrective action section that are associated with properties that have been identified as contributing to the groundwater contaminant plume are Brownie's Oil Company, Coastal Mart, Gilmore Gross Oil Company, Phillips Properties, Texas Department of Transportation, and Union Pacific Railroad. Please comply with the requirements of this letter unless you can clearly demonstrate to the TNRCC within 30 days of the date of this letter that your property or operations have not contributed to soil and groundwater contamination in this area. Is that a fair reading?
Yes, it is.
And then it goes on and it states all the actions that you are directed to take, correct? For example, number 1, you're supposed to install and operate a groundwater monitoring system to delineate and monitor the extent of the non-aqueous phase liquids, NAPLs, and dissolved phase groundwater contamination, and to identify continuing sources of groundwater contamination, if any, correct?
Where are you reading from exactly here?
Number 1.
Oh, number 1, okay. Yes.
Okay. Now, basically it's saying delineate and monitor the extent of the free product. That's the, are you aware that NAPLs is another way of saying free product floating on top of the groundwater?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Would you agree with me that since Coastal Mart first learned of the contamination around 1990-91, of the contamination at its site, that it has not defined the extent of the full plume of free product that's out there in McAllen?
I would agree that we haven't defined the full extent.
And would you agree that you, to this date, still have not defined the complete aerial extent of the dissolved phase of the groundwater contamination?
Yes, I would agree that we have not.
And would you agree with me that you have not completely delineated the full aerial extent of the dissolved phase soil contamination plume?
That is correct.
Now that's what they're asking you to do in number 1. And number 2, they're asking you to install an appropriately scaled and engineered free product, or we'll call it NAPL, and groundwater recovery system to recover all the contaminated groundwater from the environment, correct?
Yes, that is correct. However, this letter is addressed to not just Coastal Mart, it is addressed to a number of companies.
No, I understand, and your company's one of them, correct?
That's correct.
And they're asking you to install and begin operation of a system that's going to recover all of this free product that's floating, I say free product, of gasoline on top of the groundwater. Right? That's another thing they're asking you.
Yes.
Now, number 3, they're asking you to install and operate a container or collection, conveyance, and treatment system once you remove the free product from the groundwater, and to reduce the concentrations of the hazardous constituents. Correct?
Yes.
And then number 4, they're asking you to remediate the contaminated soils throughout the zone of contamination. Correct?
Yes.
And number 5, they're asking you to maintain all component systems required by this letter in a leak-free condition.
Yes.
And to notify, number 6, their local office in Harlingen at least 10 days prior to the installation of any particular samplings or wells or collections of samples, correct?
Correct.
And they want you to start submitting semi-annual reports regarding this issue, correct?
Correct.
The next to the last paragraph reads as follows, does it not? It is the continuing obligation of persons associated with a site or facility to assure that industrial solid waste or municipal hazardous waste are managed in such a way to not cause a discharge or an imminent threat of discharge of waste, a nuisance, or an endangerment to human health or the environment in accordance with 30 TAC Section 335.4. Correct?
Correct.
Furthermore, no person may engage in any activity that causes, continues to cause, or will cause pollution of any water in the state pursuant to the Texas Water Code, Section 26.212. Correct reading?
Objection form.
Is that a correct reading?
Read.
State pursuant to Texas Water Code 26.121.
That appears to be what it reads. It's hard to say.
Well, is that what it says?
It appears to be,
Okay.
unless it looks like it's maybe been marked on or something.
Now, your company wrote back the state of Texas and I'll give you that exhibit, and on June 30th of 1999, and took the position that it wasn't going to do what the state of Texas asked in that letter we just wrote, correct?
Rather than characterize what we wrote, I think the document ought to speak for itself.
Well, isn't that basically the gist of the document? We'll go to the document here in a minute.
I don't believe that it is. I believe we responded to the state's letter and made some suggestions, and it's my understanding from the state that that we have responded appropriately.
So then have you started to delineate the plume, to your knowledge?
We have not started to delineate the plume. We have.
Let me ask you, have you started to clean up the groundwater contamination as requested by the state to this date, to your knowledge?
No, we have responded to the state, and we are in ongoing discussions with the state regarding the role that we will play in this cleanup.
Do you have anybody out there right now working on what the state requested in any of those items they requested in their May letter, right now, to your knowledge?
It wouldn't be meaningful to have someone out there. We have had a meeting with the state, and we have made some suggestions, and we are waiting for their answers to those suggestions.
Let me hand you Exhibit 5. Exhibit 5 is the letter from Attorney Chuck Brown at Coastal Towers. Is he an employee of Coastal?
Yes, he is.
Okay. He actually, he's an employee of Coastal Corporation, is he not?
He is an employee of one of the coastal companies. I'm not sure exactly which company he's an employee of.
But he's in the same Coastal Tower as you,
Yes, he is.
and the same tower that is owned by Coastal Corporation,
He is in the coastal tower.
and the same Coastal Tower that houses Coastal Mart Inc.'s businesses.
That is correct.
And he writes back in response, does he not, to the state's request that Coastal go out there and cleans, and says what he says here in this letter, correct?
Yes, I
Coastal-
agree that he says what he says in this
He
letter.
represents Coastal Mart's position.
I believe the letter speaks for itself.
All right, well, let's look at it then. He writes back to the state of Texas on June 30th of 1990, and he says, "Please be advised that I represent Coastal Mart Inc., Coastal," correct?
Can I ask, is there any need to read something that's obvious here?
Well, you keep saying it speaks for itself, and no one that doesn't have this or has it in front of them to read is going to be able to read it, so that's why we're reading it.
Okay.
But it indicates, does it not, as first sentence, "Please be advised that I represent Coastal Mart Inc., Coastal," correct?
That is correct.
And its last sentence in that paragraph says, "Due to its status as the owner of a service station on the property located 421 South 23rd Street, called the property, my client is one of the affected properties." Is that a fair reading?
No, he says my client is one of the affected parties.
Parties, I'm sorry. Okay, is that a fair reading?
Yes.
The position taken by Coastal Mart on this date reads as follows, does it not, in the first paragraph, second paragraph. "Although my client does not dispute the groundwater contamination exists under the property, my client does not possess any evidence which indicates that a discharge of gasoline or other petroleum hydrocarbons has occurred since 1985, the date that it purchased the property." Is that a fair reading?
And that's fair reading, although the date is incorrect. That would have been 1986.
Okay. And so it's Coastal's position that it doesn't have any evidence that would indicate that it had a discharge of gasoline or other petroleum products that would have entered the groundwater. That's your position?
That is Coastal's position, yes.
It says, "My client has performed certain upgrade and inventory activities at the site during its ownership, and the activities did not reveal that any such discharges have occurred while my client operated the property." Do you know what activities he's talking about?
They would range anywhere from monitoring inventory to replacement of underground storage tank systems, continuous leak detection, those types of things.
Okay, and are you familiar with all those things that were done?
I'm generally familiar with those,
All right.
yes.
And we'll have an opportunity today to go through documents that, some of which you were directly involved in, and hopefully you can help us to understand how Coastal can make some of these statements to the state of Texas, okay?
Okay.
The referenced activities include, but are not limited to, tank integrity tests, the removal of underground piping, and the replacement of underground storage tanks. Fair reading?
Yes.
The next page, it indicates, does it not? However, the investigations did reveal the presence of minor historical discharges at the site. That would be your site, correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
Which is not inconsistent with the operational history of the property. Prior to my client's purchase of the property, the site was used as a service station. Now, who owned the site before you bought it at Coastal?
I know the name of the individual who was at least a principal. Don't know whether he owned it or whether it was a corporation. The individual was an individual by the name of Maxie Grossenberger.
Okay. And
Maxie Grossenbacher, I stand corrected.
prior to Mr. Grossenbacher's ownership, who owned this particular location? Do you know?
I'm not sure who owned it prior to Mr. Grossenbacher.
Have you done any historical checks to find that out?
I've personally not done any historical checks.
Who would know that in your company?
I don't know.
Well, who has anything to do with, the purchase, acquisition, or leasing?
Well, there are a number of people, but if you want to know if somebody has done that kind of research, we can find out who they are and provide that information to you. I don't know who it would be right now.
All right. Well, one of the purposes of today's deposition is to discover, and there's going to be certain things that you're going to be able to tell us in this discovery process, and there's going to be certain things that you won't be able to tell us. That is one of the areas that we want to go into discovery with by finding out who owned this prior to Coastal and Mr. Grossenbacher. So we would like the names of the people that are in your department or what department we should talk to regarding those matters, okay?
At this point, I would just be speculating to start trotting out a bunch of names. It would be much easier to find out if anybody has made such a research of the prior ownership of the property and then make that person available.
All right, well, we'll leave a blank here, and if you could do that for us, we'd sure appreciate it.
Okay?
It says several other service stations were also historically located and operated in the vicinity around the property. As such, in all probability, the existing groundwater under the property is related to a discharge from an underground storage tank located in the proximity of my client's site. Is that a fair reading?
Let me read that again. It is related to a discharge from underground storage tank system, apostrophe S, meaning any of those systems located within the proximity of my client's site.
Fair reading?
Yes.
Okay. So you all are saying, you acknowledge that there's gasoline that's floating on top of the groundwater.
We have never disputed that there is contamination existing.
And you acknowledge that there's contamination in the soils underneath the dispensers and around the tanks of your particular property.
I'm not possessed of the information as to where exactly it exists, but you know, we've never disputed since we became aware of the existence of contamination on our property.
What I'm saying is you in the position you've been in have come to learn that the soils beneath your property are contaminated with gasoline.
Yes, I have learned that.
Not just the groundwater below those soils, but the soils around and under your station are also contaminated with gasoline. Correct?
I don't dispute that.
Okay.
Never have.
And you admit that the groundwater below your property is also contaminated with gasoline.
I don't dispute that.
So much so that you know that there's free product, actual gasoline, floating on top of the groundwater below your property in McAllen. You admit that.
I don't dispute that.
It's just your position that it had to come from someone else.
It's our position that since we've owned the property, there is no evidence to indicate to us that there has been a release or a leakage of gasoline from our underground storage tank system.
Okay, well, we'll go through. That's what you've represented to the state of Texas, and now in this case, correct? That's
That
your
is
position.
correct.
And you have stated that it therefore has to come from someone else who's in this kind of business.
We don't know where it comes from, obviously. All we're saying is we have no evidence of any kind that there has ever been a release or leakage of gasoline from our facility since we have owned it.
Well, what have you done to find out where it came from?
We have monitored inventories, we've replaced the tanks.
What I'm asking you is what have you done? If you say it's not yours, what have you done to try to figure out where it came from?
That's something we're still trying to figure out.
What have you done?
I would defer you to our experts to answer those questions. I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a scientist. We rely on our experts to do that work, and there has been extensive work done in the past. The reports that are the production that resulting from that work, I believe you have.
We'll go through some
And
of
those
that.
outline what has been done up to this point in time.
Well, you have tracked it since 1991 to see what was done at this property to figure out where this gasoline came from, correct?
I don't know what you mean by the term tracked it.
You have read this file, you have followed this file, you've had direct communications with the so-called remediation companies, you have had direct communications with the state of Texas regarding this site, correct?
I have not had my fingerprint on this project on a day-to-day basis.
Not-
We've got a consultant that does that.
Right, but the in-house person at Coastal Mart that has been following this and writing to the state of Texas regarding this site, and in discussions with the remediation company that has been looking at this site is you.
That is incorrect.
You're one of the people.
I would be one of the people,
Okay.
but not necessarily the principal person.
And as one of the people, you don't know, off the top of your head anyway, what's been done to figure out where this gasoline is coming from if it's not yours. You don't know.
I cannot sit here and give you a blow-by-blow description of what has been done. There has been an extensive amount of investigation done, and that investigation is borne out in the reports of our consultants.
But nevertheless, whatever's been done, there's been enough, your attorney that's in-house has made a statement to the agency that as such, in all probability, the existing groundwater contamination under the property is related to a discharge from an underground storage tank system or systems located in the proximity of my client's site. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you haven't discussed with him from where?
I'm sure he doesn't know any more than I do where it's from.
You're sure of that?
I'll let him speak for himself, but I don't believe he knows any more than I do where it comes from.
Well, have you talked to him about this letter?
There's been discussion about this letter.
Well, let's
I-
talk
I
about
read-
that. Did you have some input in this letter?
I reviewed the letter before it was mailed.
Did you have some input?
I reviewed the letter, and I can't recall whether there was any changes that were made as a result of my review.
Well, did you have
If they
any?
were, they were insignificant.
What did you specifically do? What were you asked to do in regard to responding to the state's demand that Coastal Mart be part of the group that cleans up the mess in McAllen on 23rd Street?
So state the question again.
What part did you have in responding to the state's demand that Coastal Mart clean up the mess on 23rd Street?
Beyond being a participant in discussions on how to respond, I can't define what part I had other than being a participant in those discussions.
Who else was a participant?
Our consultant, our counsel,
How many discussions were there?
don't recall.
About how many?
A few, I don't recall.
What did you bring to the discussions?
I don't know what you mean by what did I bring.
Materials, documents?
I don't recall.
Files.
I don't recall bringing any kind of materials or documents to those discussions.
Did anyone below you or above you in the same section as you participate?
That possibly could have been someone that did, yes.
Well, who?
Possibly Red Cluck, who is the construction manager and environmental project manager for the region where this store is located.
Before you went to any of these meetings, did you review the files on this site?
No, I don't recall actually getting files out and reviewing them, no.
So you went to this meeting when you have a meeting called by whom?
I don't recall that.
Nevertheless, when was the meeting?
I don't recall that either. I don't retain dates and times for having meetings, many of which I have during the course of a day on many issues.
Do you keep a calendar so you know you have a meeting on a certain day?
I do.
Where's your calendar?
It's on my computer.
Okay.
But there are many meetings that I have that come up possibly on the spur of the moment that are not on that calendar.
If you had to refresh your memory as to how many meetings and when they were and with who, you could go to your calendar.
I could go to my calendar, and to the extent it's documented on my calendar that I have a meeting, yes, but beyond that, I don't know that every meeting that I ever had would be documented on my calendar.
All right, well now, let's just back up. Coastal Mart gets an order from the state of Texas to clean this mess up at 23rd Street. And you know that someone here at Coastal Mart called a meeting and you were part of that meeting, is how to respond to the letter, correct?
Your characterization of this letter as being a letter just to Coastal Mart, I would, I got to take issue with. It is a letter to a number of parties regarding a large area of contamination. Now, I don't understand what, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question because I really don't know what your question is what your question is, what I can do to help you or what I can do to answer you with regard to meetings or discussion.
It's, I think it was a simple yes or no. I mean, after the Coastal Mart company that you work for and have for a number of years got an order or a request from the state of Texas to clean up this contamination of gasoline that you've told us is not only combustible but poisonous, that is in the soils and the groundwater at 23rd Street in McAllen, Coastal Mart called a meeting at which you attended regarding that letter it got from the state, correct?
I don't characterize it that way. I don't characterize it as Coastal Mart calling a meeting. There were discussions regarding the letter from the TNRCC, how we can best respond. We did respond to them in this letter, and that's the end of it.
Well, let's try to fill in the middle of it, though. I want to know more about your meetings, and I want to know who attended. Now, you told me of one meeting where Mr. Gluck, was that his name? There was
a meeting that I can recall where a number of things were discussed, including this, and Mr. Cluck was present at that meeting. There's been a meeting that involved Mr. Chuck Brown.
Who is he? The attorney?
Mr. Chuck Brown is the writer of our response letter.
The in-house attorney.
And there has been.
Is he the in-house attorney, sir?
He is on the legal staff of Coastal, yes.
Okay. And who else was there besides the in-house attorney?
I don't
you and
recall. I just don't recall. I'm sorry, but I don't recall.
No notes were kept?
I don't recall whether there's any notes or not.
You made no notes.
I don't recall specifically what notes may or may not have been made.
What's going to help you to remember if you made notes? Do you have a file which you would have kept notes in?
I'm sorry, but I don't understand the line of questioning here. If you've got a question specific to this letter, I'll do my best to answer it. But I do not recall specifics of who was at meetings, when we had meetings, everything that was discussed.
You've told me you don't recall. You're telling me you didn't keep any notes of the meeting.
I'm saying I don't recall any specific notes retained from the meeting.
And if you did retain notes, where would you retain them?
Wherever I would put them when I retain them, whether it's in a file or in my attaché case. I frequently make notes when I'm in a meeting or on a telephone conversation, and those notes may be thrown in the trash shortly after that.
Well, how do you know if they weren't thrown in the trash where to retrieve them?
I've often spent time trying to find something that I thought I had that I had kept, and I couldn't remember where I put it. So,
where do you normally keep your notes when you have meetings, sir?
if I have a file on the subject that I've made notes about, and I didn't make a decision to retain those notes, then it would go. They should go in that file.
All right. What would this file for this particular meeting, if there is one that you created, what would it be called?
It would be called probably the store number.
What is the store number?
The store number is 307.
All right. Is there a file that exists for store 307? A file?
There are probably a number of files that exist for store 307.
Would there be one that you could go to see if you kept notes regarding these meetings and what they consisted of regarding how to reply to the state's request to clean this mess up?
Yes.
Have you done that before this deposition?
No, I did not.
You weren't asked to do that by your attorney?
No.
Okay. Well, we'd like to see any notes or any file that is relevant to any meetings that you had regarding the reply to the state of Texas demand that Coastal, among others, clean up this mess.
And we would object to the production of any documents that memorialize any of his communications with his lawyers or with the company's
Okay.
lawyers.
Let's certify this. So we just get a little booklet so I can remember this. Now, so these meetings in which Coastal Mark took a position that it wasn't going to clean this mess up, to your knowledge, no minutes were taken.
I'm sorry, state the premise to your question again.
These meetings regarding how to reply to the state of Texas requests to Coastal Mart and others to clean up this mess on 23rd Street. You believe no minutes were kept of those meetings at Coastal Mart?
I'm not aware that there was ever a formal meeting where there were minutes kept. I will look at my file and see if there are any notes that I took in these meetings.
What were you asked to contribute to the meeting?
I don't know how to answer that question.
What did you contribute to the meeting?
I'm going to object. It's calling for disclosure of attorney-client related material, and I'm instructed not to answer.
Oh, you're not going to answer then?
No, I will not.
All right, certify that. What did you do after the meeting in order to fulfill whatever obligations you had to continue in the help to respond to the state's demand that you clean it? Anything?
I don't recall that there was anything that I needed to do after the meeting or meetings.
And the only other person that you can remember that was at the meeting, besides Mr. Brown, the in-house counsel, is Mr. Gluck.
Well, in a meeting.
In a meeting.
There may have been corporate counsel involved in some of those meetings. And some of those meetings might have been by telephone.
And you don't remember who they might have been with and when?
I don't have recollection of every meeting and who was there, no.
Well, is there any meeting that comes to mind that you do remember regarding this issue?
There's no meeting that comes to mind that I have specific recollection of that meeting and everything that was discussed. There have been a number of meetings.
None of which you know or can remember.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, tell us the ones you can.
I can't give you a blow-by-blow of what was discussed, what I brought to the meeting, what I was required to do as a result of the meeting.
Or where your notes are, if you took them.
Or if there are notes that were taken and/or retained.
You just know that you are going to go back to the file to see if any notes were taken and retained.
I believe I have stated that previously.
And whatever you do find, we'd ask be attached to this deposition.
I'm going to object and instruct him not to attach it to the deposition if it memorializes communications with his attorneys.
Well, we'd like you then to, anything you believe that memorialized some in-house or attorney-client relationship, at least submit that in camera to the court to make that decision.
That's a standard practice, Richard.
Okay. Let's go to the third page of the document that was written in reply to the state's demand that Coastal and others clean up the contamination. The second paragraph in that letter says, the findings of Coastal's experts are even more significant in light of the absence of NAPL in Coastal's MW9, that's monitoring well, I imagine, during March 99 sampling round. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
The NAPL previously found in MW9 possessed the same characteristics as the NAPL located underneath the property, and not the characteristics of the contamination located underneath the northern properties. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
Have you read this document before today?
Yes, I've read this document.
Okay. And you had some input and got to review it before it went to the state of Texas?
Yes, I did review it before it went to the state of Texas.
And whether you made any changes or not, you don't remember?
I don't recall that I made any significant changes. There may have been one or two, but I don't recall anything that was significant.
Do you have your changes? Where would you keep your drafts?
If I have them, they would be in the same file that I referred to earlier.
Okay, so we would like those drafts as well. It goes on, the TNRCC has previously been informed that Coastal's two-plume conclusion, and you have two-plume in quotation marks, is consistent with the opinions of the plaintiffs in the pending litigation and with those of at least some of the other affected parties, Union Pacific, Phillips Brothers. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
All right, and let me ask you, what do you mean two-plume theory?
It's my understanding that through investigation of various environmental experts, consultants, that there has been developed a theory of two plumes. A northern, a fairly large northern plume and a smaller southern plume. That's the extent of my understanding of the two-plume theory.
Okay. Would it be true to state today that you would admit that Coastal hasn't defined the limits of any plume to date?
I don't know that anyone has defined the limits of any plume today.
But Coastal hasn't.
That's correct.
Coastal hasn't defined or delineated two plumes, no less one plume, correct?
Objections to form.
State the question again.
Coastal hasn't defined or delineated two plumes, no less one plume, yet.
Repeat the objection. Same objections to form.
I'm not sure what we've delineated. I think these are getting into areas that really ought to be answered by our own environmental experts.
You personally don't know then?
No, I certainly don't know.
But you know this was sent to the state of Texas taking this position for Coastal.
Yes, I do.
You didn't object to it.
I had no reason to object to it.
Well, who is the one that you understand? Well, let me back up. Let me back up. You know that you haven't defined or been shown any delineated plume by anyone, either your experts or in-house people at Coastal.
You're getting into an area of specificity. I don't know whether I've been shown. You're talking about contamination that is the subject of this lawsuit, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. You're getting into an area of expertise that I don't possess.
I'm not asking for your expertise. I'm asking if you've ever seen a map that shows a plume.
Well, this is a map right here that
Right.
shows a plume,
This is the plaintiff's.
which may or may not be fully delineated.
What I'm asking you, has anyone at Coastal or its experts ever shown you their own maps delineating the plume at this location?
I don't recall any such map. No.
Has anyone at Coastal or its experts ever shown you a map delineating two plumes at this location?
That was created by Coastal's experts?
Or Coastal?
Not that I recall.
Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. Due to the fact that the southern contamination is remarkably different than the northern LNAPL, or free product, and because of the dearth of the other known potential sources have existed in the area surrounding the southern plume, the source of the southern NAPL is in all plausibility leaking underground storage tank systems unrelated to the northern plume. Is that a fair reading?
That is a fair reading.
So it's Coastal's position that there are two plumes, and the Coastal's in the southern plume, and the southern plume is distinctly different than the northern plume. Is that
That
basically?
is my understanding of our position.
Okay. And again, I'll ask if maybe Mr. McLean and you can stand up for a moment. We can take a short break off the record while you're moving. Yes, sir. Mr. Leftwich, we've just taken a short break, and I've asked you to stand up next to the map and help us to identify, or at least by referring to the map, we're going to try to get some matters resolved here. My first point is that in the letter that Coastal wrote in response to the state's demand to clean up the entire contaminated groundwater, free product plume, Coastal took the position that, look, there's two plumes here, and this southern plume is distinctly different than what is in the northern plume. Is that a fair statement?
Can you direct me, oh, there it is, it's on the second page. Now, state your question again.
Go ahead and read it, please.
Question. Yes, sir, Mr. Leftwich, we've just taken a short break, and I'd ask you to stand up next to the map and help us to identify, at least by referring to the map, we're going to try to get some matters resolved here. My first point is that in the letter that Coastal wrote in response to the state's demand to clean up the entire contaminated groundwater free product plume, Coastal took the position that, look, there's two plumes here, and the southern plume is distinctly different than what is in the northern plume. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I would just say what the letter says is the TNRCC has previously been informed that Coastal's two-plume conclusion is consistent with the opinions of the plaintiffs in the pending litigation and with those of at least some of the other affected parties, i.e. Union Pacific, Phillips Brothers.
So
That's what it
it's
says.
Coastal's position with the state of Texas and in this case that there are two free product plumes, distinctly different.
What we just read is what the letter says.
Well, is that basically what it says?
The letter
That's the
says,
form.
the letter says, the TNRCC has previously been informed that Coastal's two-plume conclusion is consistent with the opinions of the plaintiffs in the pending litigation and with those of at least some of the other parties, i.e. Union Pacific and Phillips Brothers, in parentheses, period.
So your understanding is Coastal's position in this case, as well as with the state, is that there are two plumes that exist out at this location.
My understanding is exactly what this sentence says in this letter.
Which is what I just stated. Is that correct?
Objection
I
is
mean,
form.
if you didn't have the letter, would you not remember Coastal's position? Is that what you're saying?
I would have to know what your question is, Coastal's position with respect to what?
If you put down the letter for a minute, and would you be able to recall what Coastal's position is as regards to the
I
state?
think we've just read what Coastal's position is.
All right. I'm asking you, by the way, let me ask you this. It'll be something I need to ask you. I might as well ask you now. You're aware that your employer, Coastal Mart, Inc., has designated you as their corporate representative to testify on its behalf in this case, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So you're coming here with certain knowledge
Do
that...
we need to continue to stand here?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't need to stand. You can sit down
Well,
if you
no,
want. He's not examining you from the diagram.
Well, you just have to stand up in the next second or two.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, it's
fine.
up to you
That's
if you
fine.
want to sit down.
I was just curious whether we were through with that or not. Okay.
As the corporate representative for Coastal Mart, Inc., here to testify on its behalf regarding issues in this case, you are aware that Coastal Mart is taking the position there are two free product plumes at this McAllen location.
I'm aware that based on the body of facts that have been brought forth to this point in time, that there's a two-plume theory that we're not disputing.
Have you, at Coastal or your consultants, defined where the plume is that you're involved in, which is, per the letter, in the southern plume?
Well, I believe we have indicated that our facility is located within what appears to be the southern plume.
All right. Now, if you would, please look at Exhibit 4, which is the plume map, which shows that there are according to at least our experts at this time, 2 free product plumes, which appears to be the same position that Coastal is taking. In the southern plume, which you can see the southern red area, sir,
Yes.
can you get close to that and tell us where Coastal Mart's convenience store, gasoline station would be located, and point to it?
Well, I can't remember what the cross street is, the east-west cross street of the Coastal store. So no, I can't tell you which corner it is, because I can't remember the cross street. Seems to me it's Erie, but I'm not absolutely sure.
Where is Erie?
It would be right there, it would be right here,
Okay. Could you point to that?
right there.
So your store, if that's, the exact location, if it's not up a block or down a block, would be in what shows to be sitting right on top of the free product as delineated by the plaintiff's expert, in this case, of the southern plume, correct?
That appears to be correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'd like the camera to stay focused on that photograph. Basically, it's your contention at Coastal that whatever's in the northern plume is distinctly different than what's in that southern plume,
Objection as to form.
correct?
That's what's stated in this letter, yes.
Okay. And so, who could have, who is Coastal saying could have, other than Coastal, created the southern plume?
We don't know.
Well, who are the possibilities?
I don't know who the possibilities are.
Well, what gasoline stations have you tried to determine were in the vicinity of that southern plume?
Whatever work has been done with respect to that is the information or the results of that work is included in our consultants' reports. I don't have that information committed to memory.
So you have, again, I just want to make sure what your job is. You are in the department that heads up the environmental section for Coastal Mart Inc.
Among my responsibilities are environmental administration. That does not mean that I know everything about every project that we have going on. We have environmental project managers, we have environmental consultants, we have experts that provide us services with respect to that. That doesn't mean that I have intimate knowledge about every environmental project that's going on out there.
But this one in particular, you have been involved with communicating, as you already admitted, with the state of Texas and other agencies regarding this particular contamination at this site, right?
Together with experts, yes.
And you haven't discussed with those experts or discussed with the state or tried to find out on your own what other gasoline stations other than your own could have contributed to creating this southern plume?
I believe there has been fairly extensive work in identifying other possible contributors to the contamination, and that the results of that work is embodied in the reports of our experts.
So, but off the top of your head, you have no idea who, if any other companies, might have contributed to the southern plume. Is that your position today?
I do not know who contributed to the plume, no.
Let me ask you this. If your company is taking the position that the southern plume is distinctly different than what is in the northern plume, then you would agree that anybody north in that northern plume didn't contribute to the southern plume.
I think that goes beyond my capability to respond.
Well, that's what-
I'm not a scientist.
Well, isn't that basically what you're attorney is pointing out to the state of Texas here?
And, that's, that's whatever his letter says is exactly what it says.
Can you point to any specific reports which identify responsible parties for the Southern Plume? that you have?
I can't name those reports, no.
We tried to identify the facilities that look to have been in the northern plume as opposed to the southern plume. And I'm going to ask you one more time to stand up, and we'll have this next exhibit marked exhibit number 6, is that? Number 6 identifies exactly the location. If you can, without blocking the map, just stand next to it, please, because we've got a camera trying to get in there. If you can go a little closer to the map and just, you can see where we have identified the Coastal Mart convenience store and gasoline station was on that map, can you not?
Yes, I can.
Okay, can you point to it? All right, and what street is that?
Are you talking about the north-south street or the east-west street?
Both.
The north-south street is 23rd Street. Looks like the east-west street is Erie Avenue.
Okay. Now, again, point to that location where your convenience store is. All right. Now again, point to the southern plume on the other map. Now go back to the map that indicates where your facility was, please.
Where our facility is?
Yeah, yes. Was and is. Where do you see any other facilities north of you? North of the Coastal Mart location that you're pointing at, where do you see on our map, marked number 6, any other gasoline facilities north of your facility?
Well, I see other facilities up here that are north of our facility.
Okay. How about, let's go the first block north of you. Do you see any facilities marked on the map that you're looking at, map 6, that are gasoline facilities 1 block north of you?
No, I don't. This is not Coastal's
would you
map.
Please point so that whoever's looking with us will know where we're looking.
What do you want me to point at, Mr.
The
Roth?
block north of you.
So right here.
Right. Are there any other facilities indicated north of you?
Well, I don't see
one
any.
block?
I don't see any indicated on this map.
All right. Go another block. Are there any facilities the next block up north of where your facility is?
I don't see any indicated on this map.
All right. And go 1 block further. Are there any facilities, gasoline facilities, 1 block north of you at that location?
Again, I don't see any indicated on this map.
And another block north? Any gasoline facilities another block north?
I don't see any on this map.
And another block, please? No facilities at that location of selling gasoline?
I don't see any on this map.
And another block, please.
I don't see any on this map.
1 more block?
I don't see any on this map.
And then the next block.
I assume you're still asking if I
Going
see any.
north.
I do not see any on this map.
Yeah. Any other gasoline stations selling gasoline or that were selling gasoline north of you, another block up?
Well, I believe there's Conoco Inc., Phillips Properties,
Okay. Any others?
and going on up, City Service Company.
What others are identified there?
Anywhere on the map?
In the northern area you're in.
Okay, Gulf Oil Company, Gilmore Gross Oil Company, Brownie Oil Company.
Okay, now move your finger, point to the yellow locations that you were just at. The yellow, where the yellows are. There you go. Those are the sites that you just mentioned, correct? Phillips,
That's what the map says.
Conoco,
That's what the map shows.
Gilmore
I'm not
Groves.
stipulating the accuracy of this map.
I
That's what the
understand.
map shows.
I understand. But point back your finger to the yellow areas indicating where those gasoline facilities were.
Okay.
Now, bring your finger over to the map that delineates the plume.
Okay.
Now, keep,
No, I don't see them actually identified on this map.
all right, well,
And I'd just like to note for the record that the scale for plaintiff's exhibit number 4 and plaintiff's exhibit number 6 appear to be different.
look at the map going back to where the yellow are those gasoline facilities north of you, and you can see the street locations that they're identified on, Business 83 and 23rd Street, correct?
Business 83 and North 23rd Street. Okay.
South.
Okay.
Okay. Now go to the plume map that identifies the northern plume, and
Mhm.
show me where those facilities are on the northern plume.
Well, it would appear that they're in this area right here.
Okay. So all of the gasoline stations that we've been able to identify, before you sit down, that you just pointed to, that are in the northern plume, you would admit are not in the southern plume that you say is distinctly different from the northern plume,
Objection as to form.
correct?
These locations here are in the area that's delineated here and referred to as the northern plume.
Right.
They're not in this area that's delineated and referred to as the southern plume.
And the only facility that sells gasoline in the southern plume that appears to be the Coastal Mart facility, correct?
That's what the map reflects.
Okay. And you don't personally know of any other gasoline stations that were operating in and around that southern plume that could be responsible for that free product in the soil and on the groundwater?
No, I do not personally know of other gasoline stations. Are you referring to that are currently operating?
Currently operating,
I don't personally know, no.
or that were operating.
And, I believe there have been, within that area, a number of gasoline stations over the years that have been located there. I don't have specific information about those.
Well, what gasoline stations?
I just said I don't have any specific information about those. I think what information we do have is reflected in our own consultants' reports.
Okay.
And in a deposition on file.
In these meetings that you had in responding to the state and coming up with this two-plume theory and saying that you're not responsible, therefore, for the contamination of the groundwater, either under your property or the one in the northern plume, you mentioned that there were some consultants that were at the meetings, correct?
It's possible that our environmental consultant, RSA, was at the meeting.
Okay, and who at RSA would be there?
That would be Carl Teinert.
Anyone else?
Not that I can recall, no.
You also told me that you are not the principal person who tracks the assessments or the progress of what goes on at this particular location. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Who is?
Presently, it is Red Cluck.
Who was?
Prior to Red Cluck, it would have been Hugh Bostick.
Hugh Bostick?
Hugh Bostick.
Where is he?
Don't know where he is. He's no longer employed by Coastal. He's retired, but I don't know where he resides.
Is there a way we can find that out?
We can attempt to find out.
Okay. Would you, we'd ask informally if you would attempt to find out his current location and let your attorney know, and we'd ask that Mr. Guerra let us know that. Who was before Mr. Bostick?
Possibly, the only other person I would know that would have been involved would have been Bud Curran, C-U-R-R-A-N.
And what was his position?
He was construction manager and construction and environmental manager for the region that was operationally responsible for this store.
Okay, and where's he?
He's no longer employed by Coastal. Again, I don't know where he is right now.
All right, and can you try to find that out for us and let your attorney know that?
If we have not already provided his whereabouts, yeah, we'll see if we can determine where he is.
Any others?
Not that I can recall.
What about George Meredith?
George Meredith would not have been involved as an environmental project manager. George Meredith worked in the Houston office as an assistant to me for a period of maybe a year and a half in environmental, and primarily he was responsible for filing and maintaining records, keeping them in appropriate files, that type of thing.
Where's he?
He is retired. Don't know where he presently resides.
Can you try to find that out?
Sure.
Have you ever read the reports that went along with the letter that was sent by Coastal Mart's attorneys to the state, saying they're not going to clean up this mess? Have you ever read the expert?
I'm not familiar. What letter are you referring to that Coastal Mart's attorneys wrote saying we were not going to clean up?
Just the one we've been talking about all morning, the June 30th, 1999 letter.
Well, this letter does respond to the May 17 letter of the TNRCC, and does in fact appropriately respond to that letter, and we are awaiting further direction from the TNRCC.
Well, you haven't agreed to clean up the groundwater contamination, correct? You're stating that in this letter.
We have approached the TNRCC and have stated that, given the two-plume theory, that we would address that southern plume, and we have asked the TNRCC Underground Storage Tank Reimbursement Fund to reinstate us in order to do that.
Have you had discussions and gone to Austin and talked to the agency?
We have had one meeting
You?
with him. Yes,
When?
approximately a month ago.
How many times before that?
I believe there was one meeting of all the parties soon after this letter was written.
How many times have you been to Austin and talked to the agency about this contamination?
Since we've known of the contamination,
Yeah.
there probably has been 3 separate occasions that I've been involved in a meeting with TNRCC regarding this store.
Okay. And that was prior to the state ordering you to clean up the entire free product contamination out there?
There would have been one meeting that would have occurred prior to that, and it would have been some time back.
All right. And then, since you were ordered to clean up the free product contamination, you have gone to Austin again. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
And who else went with you?
Our consultant and corporate counsel,
Who's your consultant?
Carl Tynert, Bob Kelly.
Okay, so those 2 people went to Austin with you to speak to the agency.
Yes.
And that was after you got the letter saying you had to clean up the entire contamination.
And I believe Mr. Guerra was at that meeting too.
Is that correct? That was after you got the letter?
That was after we got the letter.
Okay. And what was discussed there?
Well, a number of things. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
How long was the meeting?
I don't know. Maybe a couple of hours.
Okay.
Maybe less.
Just give us an overview of what was discussed.
You're talking about the meeting where all the parties were present?
Okay,
All the parties who were the recipient of the TNRCC letter?
all right, well, yeah, I guess, was everybody there? Phillips and,
I don't believe everybody was there. Some were there, some were not, and I can't recall everybody who was there.
well, tell me who you remember that were at the meeting that you went to speak to the agency, the state of Texas, after receiving their letter demanding that you clean the contamination.
I believe, in addition to Coastal Mart, that Texas Department of Transportation had a representative there. I believe Phillips Properties had a representative there. I believe Union Pacific Railroad had a representative there. Don't recall that anyone else had a representative there.
All right, and who were the representatives of Phillips?
I don't have names.
Who were the representatives there of the others?
I don't have names.
You didn't keep notes of that meeting either?
I didn't write down their names.
Did you keep notes?
I may have some notes. I may have some notes.
And would those notes be in 307 file?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you give those notes to your attorney?
Don't believe so, no.
Did he ask you for all your files regarding this case?
You mean since that meeting? I'm not aware. I don't recall any such request.
Okay. You know those notes weren't trashed.
No, I don't know. I don't. They may or may not be. I don't know.
Okay. Will you find out for us, and if they are not been trashed, provide those to your attorney so we can have copies?
Okay.
And who led the discussion?
One of the gentlemen with TNRCC, and I don't recall his name. He had a foreign name. I can't recall exactly what it was.
And what was the gist of the discussion?
The discussion was each party laying out their relative positions.
Did anybody accept the responsibility for cleaning up the contamination at that meeting?
At that meeting, I don't recall that anybody did.
And after the meeting, well, what else went on at the meeting? Tell me.
I can't give you a blow-by-blow of what went on at the meeting. If you want to ask me a specific question, I'll do my best to answer it.
Well, I wasn't there, so I'm asking you to tell me everything you can remember about the meeting.
Well, that's, there's just no way that I can do that.
So your notes would help us to understand that?
Yes, if I have notes, it would help, yes.
So we may have to address the issue again if we're, if and when those notes are provided. After the meeting in Austin with this state of Texas regarding their letter saying that this group had to clean up the free product contamination, what did you do?
I went back home.
And what did you and your company do in response to that letter and that meeting?
We had already responded to that letter with our June 30 letter.
I see. So this meeting was after your written response on June 30th.
This, I don't recall the date of the meeting. The letter is dated June 30th. Whether or not we had the meeting on that date or not, I'm not sure. The letter may have been presented at that meeting.
Okay. What happened after the meeting in Austin when you got back home? Did Coastal Mart and or you or anyone that you know in Coastal Mart, have they done anything since then?
We have met with the underground storage tank reimbursement fund people to ask them to consider reinstating us under the fund so that the actions that we would take would be duly reimbursable.
That brings me to an interesting point. Right now, this is in the Industrial Waste Hazardous Materials Division, correct?
I believe that's correct.
That is, this site has been placed in that division of the state of Texas agency that oversees this particular kind of problem.
I believe that is correct.
And when a site is placed in that division, there is no reimbursement to companies like Coastal if they happen to be involved in those issues of contamination for reimbursement for cleanup, correct?
That's my understanding.
And this matter has been in the Industrial Waste and Hazardous Materials Division since about 1996, correct?
Objection form.
I can't confirm that
Well, it's
date.
been in there at least a couple of years.
It's been in there a while. I don't know how long.
And during the entire time that it's been in there, it's been in a division that doesn't allow for reimbursement of cleanup costs to companies like yours, correct?
That's my understanding.
And during that entire time period, Coastal Mart has done nothing to spend any money cleaning up the mess in McAllen, Texas.
Coastal had done a significant amount of work at that site until such time as the state of Texas made the determination on their own that they would assume the responsibility of that entire contaminated area. And it was at that point in time, with the agreement of the state of Texas, the TNRCC, that we ceased the activities that were ongoing at the site at that time.
Okay, I'm going to object to your non-responsiveness and ask my question again. The only cleanups, the only programs of excuse me, let me start off. When this site in McAllen, Texas was referred to this particular division of the state of Texas, which didn't allow for cleanup costs to be reimbursed to companies like yours, Coastal Mart stopped doing any remediation of this site.
Objection.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that at all. I think.
Well, how much money has
I
Coastal
think that-
Mart
I
spent?
think that
Let me.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead.
The transfer of the responsibility to address this on a state lead basis occurred before this transfer of the site under the different set of regulations. Those are two separate events.
I'm saying, sir, that my question is simple. Since this site in McAllen has been transferred by the state of Texas to the Industrial Hazardous and Waste Division, Coastal Mart hasn't spent any money regarding the cleanup. Is that correct?
That is not when when Coastal stopped spending money. Coastal stopped spending money at the time prior to that the TNRCC agreed to take it over on a state lead basis.
I understand.
It was prior to
So
that.
around 1996, Coastal stopped paying any money for the cleanup.
Whatever the date is that the TNRCC agreed to take the state lead in addressing the area of contamination, that is when we stopped the activities that we had ongoing at that point in time.
Right. And from that time to the present day, Coastal Mart has not done anything to clean the site.
I'm not aware of anything. There may have been something done, but I can't point to it because the state had agreed to take the lead.
And to your knowledge, since that time, Coastal Mart hasn't spent 10 cents of its money to clean that site.
Not since the state has agreed to take the lead.
Now, you're lobbying for the state to put this in a program by claiming that your plume is in the south distinctly separate from the plume in the north to allow you to get into a program that would pay Coastal Mart's taxpayers' money to clean the site.
Objections to form.
Correct?
We believe the site as if we're addressing the southern plume as a UST operator, that we should be eligible under the fund as we were before the state agreed to take the lead, that we should again be eligible under the fund.
By the way, just so we clear this up, when you say the state took the lead up until the time it transferred it to the Industrial Waste and Hazardous Division, correct?
Yeah, I don't know how, technically, I don't know how you would characterize it from that point forward,
Yeah.
but
But
it seemed to be a change at that point.
right, and at no time has Coastal volunteered to pay any monies during the time it's been in this Industrial Hazardous Waste Division to help clean it up, right?
That's correct.
And is it a fair statement to say that if the state doesn't go along with your two-plume theory and agree to refund you for any cleanup, that the Coastal Mart has no intentions of spending its own money to clean this mess up?
No, I don't believe that's a fair statement at all.
Okay, then is it Coastal Mart's position that even if the state decides that Coastal Mart is not entitled to any taxpayer money or refunding for any remediation costs, that it's going to do it?
It's Coastal's position that in conjunction with consultation with our consultants, the TNRCC, and our legal counsel, that we will do what is appropriate and right.
And if you don't get reimbursement, as far as you're concerned, at least right now, there's no reason for you to believe that you're going to get started cleaning up this mess.
I'll say that again.
Yeah. Unless you have guarantees here at Coastal from the state of Texas that Coastal is going to receive reimbursement for any cleanup costs, you have no intention at this point in time at Coastal to clean this mess up.
Objection is to form.
It is not Coastal has not ever indicated to my knowledge, nor does it intend to make any action that it takes on that site to investigate, delineate, or remediate conditional upon receiving reimbursement.
When has Coastal ever done anything investigating or remediating where it hasn't got reimbursement?
We haven't.
You've always been reimbursed.
We have been reimbursed most of what we have applied for up to this point.
And
yes.
then when the reimbursement stopped, you stopped cleaning.
No, when the state agreed to take the state lead, that's when we ceased our activities.
And then after it left state lead to industrial hazard and waste, Coastal Mart didn't continue the cleanup because there was no reimbursement program.
There was also no requirement for Coastal to do anything at that point in time.
Okay. But you know there's no reimbursement while it's in this particular division it's in.
That's my understanding.
And during this period of time, Coastal Mart hasn't done any cleaning up of this mess. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay, let's go to, let me hand you what's being marked Exhibit 7. Have you seen the expert report that was filed along with the Coastal letter to the states in June saying Coastal was not going to clean up the groundwater contamination?
Objections to form.
I've seen this report. I'm not aware that it says we're not going to clean anything up.
No, I'm talking about that went with the letter that said that.
Well, our letter didn't say that either.
Have you seen Exhibit 2 before, sir?
Exhibit.
I'm sorry, have you seen Exhibit 7 before, sir?
Yes, I have seen this exhibit.
Okay. When did you first see this?
Probably soon after it was written, so soon after June 28.
Did you go over these issues with the people that prepared it?
No, this is a report prepared by our consultant.
Did you go over that with them?
No, don't have any recollection of having gone over it with them in their preparation of it.
Have you read this before today?
I have read it, yes.
Would you go to page 1? Actually, it's chronology. It's titled chronology. The third paragraph, you indicate there, or it's indicated by your experts, that because of the large aerial extent of the released product and the potential for multiple sources, Coastal suggests that the TNRCC take the site into the state lead remediation section of the Petroleum Storage Tank Division. TNREC transferred the site to state lead in March of '95. The state lead contractor took over operations of the recovery system in February '96. In March '96, the site was transferred from the state lead to the Industrial Hazardous Waste Division. Is that a fair reading?
That you used the present term suggest in the second sentence. That is suggested, but other than that, yes.
And that's when, as far as you know, remediation of this particular site stopped.
Yeah, I don't have a recollection that is different than that.
And you know that since March of '96, your company, Coastal Mart, hasn't done a thing to clean this site up.
That's correct. Nor have we been required to.
Now, you state in the next paragraph that while Coastal was conducting its remedial activities, Phillips Properties was conducting remedial activities at its site located at the southeastern corner of the intersection between U.S. Business 83 and South 23rd Street, about 4 blocks north of Coastal number 307. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
Phillips Properties discovered a release at its site in 1990 and removed its tanks in 1992. Fair reading?
Yes.
Its remedial activities have included a groundwater pump and treat system to recover product. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
Okay. And then along with this particular expert report, there was another expert report that Coastal Mart sent to the state of Texas from Wade Research, Inc. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
And that's, we'll mark Exhibit 8. Have you had an opportunity to see that before?
I've read this report, yes.
Coastal Mart represented to the state of Texas that Mr. Wade is a renowned if I'm not, I don't want to mischaracterize it, but a renowned expert in the area of being able to identify or fingerprint particular products. Would you agree with that?
That's not my letter. I believe that's in Mr. Brown's letter.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not qualified to make a determination on his qualifications. If you know, whatever Mr. Brown's letter says is probably accurate, but you'd have to ask him if you have concerns about that.
Okay. Nevertheless, Mr. Wade, another expert Coastal relied on in its representations to the state of Texas, made certain findings, did he not, in this report?
I believe the report will spell out pretty clearly what his findings were.
He indicates, does he not, that if you look on number 1, page 1, that there is a single gasoline cluster with a unique chemical signature of unleaded gasoline identified at monitoring wells 1 through 3 and 6, 8, and 9 that appears to have originated from a single unidentified source. Correct? Reading?
That's what it says.
Now, what I'd like to do, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to go back to this map to get an idea where these monitoring wells are, unless they've been attached to this particular document. We can use them. Take a break off the record for 1 second. Let us find a map that'll help you to see these monitoring wells.